Mori oho, mori tu, mori ora kia tātou, homie, hui, taiki. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this Discussing Tourism webinar. My name's Steve Hanrahan. I'm the Advocacy Manager for TIA and Facilitator for today's webinar. TIA are pleased to bring this webinar to you in partnership with our strategic partner, Marsh. Marsh is the world's leading insurance broker and risk advisor, serving commercial and individual clients with data-driven risk solutions and advisory services. Today's webinar is on assessing your changing risk profile and wargame business scenario planning. And our presenter today is Chris Bay. Chris leads Marsh New Zealand's consulting practice. Following the presentation, there'll be the opportunity for some Q&A. So please note the Q&A button at the base of the screen and send your questions through. The webinar is scheduled for 30 minutes. To begin, I'd like to introduce Adam Wilson, who is the Senior Risk Advisor at Marsh, and Adam will introduce himself before we get started. So Adam, over to you.
Thanks, Steve. Look, it's just a really quick intro from me. Deb Fisher and myself are two of the main faces you'll see in the tourism space from Marsh. But we've also built quite a significant amount of resource behind us. So we have a team of regional reps and regional managers that are there to support TIA members. And with simply reaching out to us, we can offer free risk advice to any of the members at any time. So my contact details will be on the TIA website, but you can easily reach out to one of the TIA team themselves if you need to get a hold of us. It's a great turnout for today's webinar, which shows that the topics that Chris is going to cover are top of mind for tourism businesses in the current environment. So we're stoked to have so many of you on board today. But apart from that, I'll hand over to Chris so he can delve into the content for today's webinar. Over to you, Chris.
Many thanks. So a very warm welcome to all, and many thanks for the time and the effort to join me today. And look, I hope everyone's been well and you're enjoying the increased comforts of level 1. We've been in for a little while now. Yeah, so I'm Chris Bay. I head Marsh's consulting advisory division here in New Zealand. And I thought it'd just be quite a good introduction to take on board our team, the Marsh Advisory Services. Marsh Advisory Services is split into 4, I guess, pillars. The first part is around claims. Okay, so we're very targeted around our supporting our insurance portfolio and our clients. The claim solutions involves both our advocacy piece and our forensic accounting. The other pillar is around property, where we have a strong valuations team and engineers inside our property team undertake what we call risk engineering and property loss control programs. There's an analytics part under alternative risks, where we've got a team of actuaries that undertake various risk modeling, loss modeling, and alternate risk financing type vehicles or tools. The second part, which is the area of this talk, is strategic risks, and covering business continuity planning, emergency management, enterprise risk management, and cyber. So the agenda for this presentation will include, our changes in attitude to risk, traditional risk management practices, scenario planning, wargaming, and why, and what are those gaps between the two. Our current situation, with the effects that we have for the pandemic of COVID-19, that's going to be the main focus of this talk, which obviously is very topical. So how has this changed our attitude to risk? How has it changed our risk profile? I don't think it's overstating to say that the event has provided us all a greater appreciation of the widespread impact that the pandemic has to people, our culture, our health and safety infrastructure and economy. And the tourism industry itself, has experienced significant impacts that you could never imagine within the industry. For example, pandemic has caused closures issues of property access, how we interact, those safe distancing, contact tracing, hygiene requirements, gathering numbers. There's compliance with regulation, changes in regulation. For example, some property owners have, during the lockdown, have had to have issues there with trying to maintain their building, but not being able to access it. How do you do that? And what does that mean from an insurability and maintenance perspective? And of course, we're all facing this recessionary front. There's obviously been a great appreciation of the widespread impact of the pandemic to people, our culture, health and safety infrastructure and economy. And the virus has moved and changed the way people, businesses and governments around the world spend, how we communicate, how we travel. So businesses need a better understanding of this information and what it means to them. You know, until a vaccine is found, companies, organizations will still need to navigate the constantly shifting threats and continuously communicate with the right employees at the right time to keep them safe, as well as to have awareness of the potential business impacts. We've seen this globally. You know, it's been happening. You know, I point only to Singapore, South Korea, and now our closest neighbours. You know, those folks in Victoria and Australia. And recently in news, we've had an issue with a person with COVID-19 positive, absconding from isolation, mixing in with society. So what would that mean in terms, again, of possible reinfection and impact on the tourism industry? You know, what I've talked about, that list, it's obviously not exhaustive. I've just handpicked a few examples to illustrate the issues that arose. And many of you on this call can think of many other situations and events that has impacted you directly. So what has happened? What was the performance of our traditional risk management practices like? Look, it's fair to say that the actions of organizations during the recovery stage of the pandemic has been predominantly cost reductions and cost savings across the portfolio of clients that we have seen that we manage at Marsh. You know, risk management includes developing a policy, frameworks, processes for risk identification, assessment of consequence and likelihood, identification and development of controls and mitigations, and implementation, audits, maturity and application of contingency analysis. There's a quote there by a famous guy that you may see around what enterprise risk management is. And I like to think of it as just an art. You know, it's an art form. There's various tools and stuff, and I'll talk about some of these shortly. But it is truly an art of developing a fit-for-purpose framework and process to identify and assess and treat those organizational risks to support your objectives. So here's some examples then of risk management methodologies that I've discussed. And here we have enterprise example output from an enterprise maturity assessment. Okay, so you can do a self-assessment, you can have a consultant or third party help you facilitate this. Here's another one. This is against risk management principles, ISO 31000, for example, for company A. There's various methods and tools for risk identification and assessment. In this case here is the more traditional 5x5 risk assessment based on consequence or impact and likelihood or probability of something happening. And looking at those risks from different areas, for example, general management, compliance, financial risks, risks around technology and so forth. And out of that, developing at the bottom there under risk framework management, some sort of risk register, okay, and looking at those highest priority risks. Once the risk gets through and the event occurs, what will we do? What are mitigation strategies and so forth? So business continuity planning and why. Various methods to actually develop a business continuity plan, such as undertaking or starting with a risk assessment, i.e. a business impact analysis. And in this case here, we're looking at a particular organization, their supply chain and their value chain, and what are their maximum tolerable outages or disruption tolerance for their particular services or products. So what are those risks to them to inform the business continuity? So this brings you on to scenario planning and wargaming and why. I guess firstly, scenario planning. This is all about exploring the potential or possible events. You know, it's those best case, worst case. It's identifying those trends and considering the implications, including the speed or velocity of the change and the duration of. So in the situation that we're in, there's uncertainty with regards to the duration and impact and potential oscillation between crisis stages. What would, it'll be interesting in the next couple of weeks to see what impact that one individual had in his short runabout in downtown Countdown, for example. So scenario planning could or should include events that are both political, technological, think about our markets, our customers, our supply chain, employees, and our people, and consideration of those external environment and the industry and organizational forces. So it requires that organizational view, and it's a structured methodology to try and prioritize and optimize both time and resources. So if you've conducted a business impact analysis, that's a good place to start, because some of those risk drivers or causal factors that you've identified are perfect places to start scenario planning with. So wargaming and techniques are used as subsets of scenario planning. That's how I like to think about it. But the difference here is its consideration is given to the view of the opposing party, which could lead to an organization to think outside the box and have potential business directional changes and those divestitures from the norm. So it effectively asks the question, what if, each time that, and typically would include a diverse range of personnel throughout the organization. So in effect, it's the view of your competitors. You know, what would they do? That what if? I hope this doesn't sound complicated, but if it does, and you may wonder how best to start, I'd like to take you through a very simple framework and tool which you can utilize. So in this, having understanding what the scenario analysis is for, you know, are we doing this based on an entity? Is it based on a business division, a person? Like it could be a key individual or key roles that we're undertaking a scenario planning exercise for. That business impact assessment is to understand the criticality of the area that we're assessing, and what the interruption level is. Who is it completed by? When do we complete it? A scenario plan or even a wargaming strategy is a point in time, okay? So this may change a few months down the track. For example, we undertook this in April, we were in lockdown, and then and now we're at a different level. How would we change? You know, well, certainly there'll be different drivers now and different things that we'll think of. We will have learned from different experiences and therefore have a different view. And who would we send this up to once we've done it? So it's an information flow and it's an information management process. Just like to take you through this example tool. So we talked about originally about some categories. So what I've got here are just purely examples, okay? So you tailor this for your own organization as you undertake it. But maybe some of the useful things to start with is things like, what would the government do? They've got a big impact, for example, in this current crisis. on what happens to you, us, to our competitors, to our markets, to our people, our employees. We've talked about customers, supply chain, technology, and our competitors. Think of those scenarios, and here's some just as a starter for 10. For example, government decisions, you know, the scenario around increased measures, you know, how about funding or lack of funding in certain areas? Employees, as more people are starting to work from home, what does that mean? Is there been changes in morale? There's been in productivity, or maybe increases? You know, you start thinking about, geez, you know, maybe we should change the way we work. I think even at Marsh, for example, all of us experiencing what it was like to work from home, I was old school. I thought, oh, this will never work. And in fact, I think it's great. We did a survey and about 95 or 98% of us thought it's fantastic to work from home. So there could be some positive out of this, but how do we take advantage of it? What do we do? What are changing customer behavior? Technology, the main emphasis there around during lockdown was cyber attacks. And we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. Supply chain. Compounding events are basically another major event happening while you're trying to deal with your current event or scenario. So during lockdown, for example, there's a major fire at your facility. With all the eyes off the ball, perhaps there's room or potential for internal fraud. So thinking through those things there. And our competitors, what are they doing? What sort of marketing initiatives? What's the right time to enter the market? Should we enter first, or should we wait for others and follow? You know, how about any potential new entrants? We certainly saw that during lockdown, where you know, Australia breweries started making hand sanitizers. We saw manufacturing companies in New Zealand here change to start making face masks, ventilators and so forth. So what are potential new entrants could there be in our market? If we look at, then we look at likelihood. You know, is it possible? Is it unlikely? Understanding what those impacts are, both from a financial perspective and from non-financial. Look at the best and worst cases from those. So non-financial is just as important as a financial impact, because sometimes those non-financial impacts, say it's reputational, say it's market, will flow on to something financial anyway. Velocity, taking account. So a typical risk management, what we looked at, and if you recall that 5x5 matrix, we looked at consequence or impact and likelihood. That's it, right? It's very static. The scenario planning, we need to start looking at time zones, and we need to start looking at that speed or velocity of the impact. You know, is it going to be a short term, a V-like response? So it happens very quickly and then heads back to normal. Or is it going to be a long-term thing with a long tail? And hence your risk assessment is this three-dimensional thing rather than that two-dimensional box that I showed in the typical risk management practices. It considers both likelihood, impact, and velocity. Lastly, the duration. When we scenario plan, how long do you think this would take? You know, what would be the impact on us, or even on the market? Is it a short-term thing? Is it a medium term? Is it a longer term? The other part is looking at how we respond then to each event or each scenario that we come up with. Firstly, our response. How do we communicate? How would we best activate our business continuity? How about how do we manage our assets? Look at our resourcing and redeployment of them. Through that recovery stage, cost control is a key thing. How do we de-escalate the situation? How do we debrief and learn and do better? And the stage probably that we're going into now is that preparation. You know, what happens now if there was a second lockdown? What does that mean for us? You know, have we got better, improved plans in place in terms of being more resilient? And have we got any strategies around our allocation resources of capital, and what we're going to do in the next situation? And what do we think our competitors may do, and for us to interact and counter that? Lastly, looking at our risk financing options, because a lot of what happens actually becomes a bottom line hit, right? So expenses increase, revenue decreases. What sort of risk financing transfer tools do we have? Insurances, also other types of tools. How insurable are those scenarios or those risks that we're looking at? Having that conversation then with, say, your broker can help you with that. At Marsh, for example, we've had a number of potential claims from clients around COVID-19 response of their policies, like their property policies. It varies from client to client depending on what the policy wording is. So being clear on whether your insurers would respond or not to an event is a useful thing to discuss about, rather than it happening and you're hoping that something would help you out, to help you ride through, to recover on your business, and maybe it may not respond at all. So be clear on that. The gaps. So I think it's worthwhile just stating that risk management practices I discussed at the start of the presentation versus scenario planning, they're both complementary, and undertaking both supports business resiliency. So I'm not suggesting at all to throw away your 5x5 risk management matrix and burn your business continuity and incident response plans, but to have both. One, the scenario planning is a point in time. It's a dynamic tool, and it both goes to inform your risk management practices. Your risk management practices in some way also, because you start identifying some of those risks, inform your scenario planning perspective. From I guess some of the key differences between the two is that risk management, we're talking about the norm, all right? You know, how do we keep our business going? One, to stop that risk or minimize that risk from happening. And if it does happen, how are we going to keep our business going? Scenario planning, and especially thinking about wargaming, is that step outside the box. It becomes that manufacturing company that was making surfboards that's now making face masks or face shields, you know, that would never have been inside their business continuity plan, right? So it's useful. They're both useful. They both help inform each other. They don't negatively impact each other. So that the aim of that scenario planning exercise is to try and identify those trends. You know, it helps you sit back, think about and explore those possible or potential events, and then consider the implications. I like to think of it as that deep dive, all right? So you think about a few things that could happen in terms of how the government could affect you, what your customers would do, what your competitors would do, and you plan those out. So having a formalized risk management framework and processes will help identify those gaps and where certain things like controls and mitigation should be strengthened should a major event occur. All right, so that's a complementary part. And as a crisis can have an impact on both in terms of its speed, its breadth of impact, and the depth. And all these things we like to mitigate. So in a typical risk management framework, we don't think about that time factor. We don't think about velocity. We don't typically think about duration. We just think about what other potential risks are and what can we do about it, okay? Scenario planning, we add both that third and potentially fourth dimension to it. So, these are all tools that scenario planning can help with. So in summary, if we look at this diagram here, I like to think of baseline 101, risk, standard risk management practices, and these things need to be tailored to your business. We take it up a level and we deep dive in. We think about some key potential events at a point in time, and this, you do this every so often with some frequency, depending on organization and the type of scenario that you're thinking about. And the other part is just exercising. How would we respond? Exercise that. What we do with recovery and our learnings, our debriefing, and what we're going to do in terms of being better prepared and more resilient. So, in summary, a formalized risk management framework and processes, established, will help in identifying and strengthen those controls, mitigations should a major event occur. Scenario planning is complementary to traditional risk management practices, and it supports business resiliency. The aim of a scenario planning exercise is to try and identify those trends and exploring possible or potential events and considering the implication. It allows that deep dive into the potential risk event. And wargaming can be thought of as a subset of scenario planning, but consideration is given to the view of the opposing party, that competitor. It asks the question, what if, each time, and typically would include a diverse range of personnel throughout the organization. A simple framework can be used to scenario plan, and risk management framework and practices should be tailored to your organization. It needs to be developed to be something that works for you and your business. Risk management is a tailored approach, and it's not a one size fits all. And that's why I think of it as an art. The other thing is formal and regular exercising of key or critical scenarios that you've identified at that point in time will support response and recovery phases during a real event and help you improve preparation for the next occurrence. So basically, another little plug about Marsh and some of our services. So we look through what I talked about in terms of responding to an event, recovery and preparation. When we respond to an event, Marsh's services in terms of consulting around, for example, pandemic analytical forecasting models, looking at business resiliency, undertaking those scenario planning and wargaming facilitation runs with yourselves. Looking at our claims and our business interruption declared values, because that's changed now, in that recovery step. We can help with facilitation around the C-suite and board and pandemic advisories and piece of the works, and evaluations around preparation, which I think we're probably starting to get into now, looking at what we do and how we become more resilient. Looking at other types of pandemic preparedness and redesigning of plans and that for your business. Facilitation of business continuity and supply chain to help those to be more resilient and so forth. So I would probably just going to stop there. I know we're a little bit early, but I hope that that sits well, bodes well with everybody on the call. And I'd just like to say many thanks for your time, and I trust that this has been helpful. And I'd like to end there and take any questions. Also like to say that we can make available to the members the tool that I showed, just in a very simple Excel spreadsheet, which you can take and tailor for your own organisation.
We're going to send that out with the follow-up email, Chris. So
Right.
I think TIA is going to send that tomorrow, potentially, by the sound of it.
Great.
Well, great. Thanks, Chris. Great overview there of risk management frameworks and also the scenario planning. We've got probably time for a couple of questions. I encourage participants to send through any questions you might have at the moment. Perhaps just one to kick off, Chris, is around, for an operator who doesn't have an established risk management framework at the moment, I assume they can use the methodology, but where do you suggest that they might start, or was there some do's and don'ts that they should think about as they start on implementing such a system, a risk management system in the business?
Yeah, that's a good question, and it's typically been one that many of our clients have asked. You know, I think probably for an organisation, one of the key things that you should do is just have a risk register. All right, so you know, going down being aligned to ISO 31000 risk management principles in it, it's great. You know, that's fantastic, and I fully endorse that. But you know, starter for 10, identify your risks. Identify and assess your risks. Once you've done that, you can just list them down. Straight away, that's what we call a risk register. That's a really good starter for 10. Then from that, like we've discussed there in terms of scenario planning, just have a look at those risks there and say, you know, at this point in time, are these things critical things that we need to talk about, and to see how would they play out. But then putting that time component in it, both the speed of response of an impact and how long would it take, that duration. So then you can start to use, say, that simple scenario planning tool that I talked about earlier and went through.
Okay, great. And in your view, Chris, how often, once I've got this framework up and running, done some scenario planning, how often should they revisit it? What do you think is good practice around revisiting these?
Yeah, typically we would say, for example, just update a risk register would be annually. So even when you're talking about scenario planning, you know, do it at least annually. And it, obviously, I think it depends on your business, and also what sector or industry your business is in. So maybe, for example, if it was you're in a IT type startup, you've got a lot of competitors around you, or potential new entrants and so forth, you might do scenario planning on a greater frequency, as an example. So it really depends, but I'd say at least annually for both.
Okay. A couple of more questions coming here, Chris. For a small business, what are the costs involved?
What's the cost involved? In terms of just a direct facilitation, I think, so let me, I guess, take you through the process. So otherwise, if I give you guys a number out there, everyone goes, oh, that number, but you have no context of what that means and what we do and so forth. So the process would involve, we would conduct a short interview or chat just to get some context, to see, to I guess get the scenarios or scenario planning right for our own workshop. So we'd undertake maybe 1.5 to 2 hour discussion with the client about what they would like to talk about, how we would go about doing it, talk about things like your risk appetite and what that means. And some clients don't have that. They don't have that 5x5 matrix, and they've got no idea what consequence means and likelihood. And we would develop that within that time frame. Would conduct a workshop, and that workshop will probably be between about, I don't know, 4 hours, depending on the client, or between maybe 3 at the low end, 4 hours to 6 hours all day. And then develop some sort of report output or minuted discussion, basically. So, so with all that in mind, in terms of for our own time, it's probably going to start around the 5K sort of mark.
Okay. Question here, how far do you drop down in terms of creating a risk register?
How far do you drop down?
Yeah, I imagine it's terms of sort of how far do you go down in the risks of that the business might have?
Oh yeah, no, okay, yeah, I've got you. So when that's a really good point, and what I suggest is always look at causal factors. Okay, I've seen lots of risk registers out there with people have done, so it's good that they've done them, but and it's just like business continuity plans. It's good they've got one, but they don't have any meat on them. You know, they've just done them because I don't know, maybe some consultant like me told them it's a good idea to do. Or they just didn't understand what they're trying to achieve. So when you try to develop a risk register, look at an event, think of a scenario. Don't say financial risk. What's our financial risk going to be? Oh, fraud. Someone stole some money. Okay, put that one down. How much is that going to impact us, and so forth? Then everyone goes, great. We've got a risk register on financial risk. Great, fraud. But the scenario is how does that occur? And you think through it and you go, oh yeah, that's right. Jim's got access to this and this, and oh, actually they don't. They sign. They're the ones who are the only ones that's signing something. Blah. So then you've got the scenario. How could that happen that they could only be the only signatory? Oh, that's because that only happens when Doug is away, or something. So there you've got a scenario, and you're actually drilling to those causal factors, right? And then you start the conversation of the consequence. What could it mean to me? How could it impact me? What's the likelihood of it impacting? Well, I don't know. Doug's away every 6 months, you know, something like that. So a deep dive. It's just like the other one's assets. So you go, you know, what's our asset risk? Oh, we could have fire. Oh yeah, fire's a big one. Fire's a big one. But how could fire occur? What will cause a fire? That's what you want to. That's what you want to know. And you could be saying it's a, I don't know, it's just a building fire. Well, oh, that's because you know we don't have sprinklers, and so that can put a fire out. But then we've got fire could occur because we've got the transformers inside the building and so forth, and we don't maintain them, or they're not maintained very much, or something. You see, then you actually thinking about the particular risk that could cause the most likely risks that could cause the impact. Okay, I hope that's answered that question.
Yeah, no, it does. Thanks, Chris. Right, well, that draws us to the end of our questions, so we'll draw to a close now. Some closing comments from me. Firstly, thank you to all our members for participating today and your questions. And thank you also to Chris, Adam, and TIA Strategic Partner Marsh, much appreciated. The webinar recording will be available on the TIA website by the end of tomorrow. And also a reminder to visit our COVID-19 pages on the website. There's lots of current information, advice and support for operators. If you have any particular queries, please get in touch with us either via info@tia.org.nz or call us also to discuss, and our phone numbers are on the website contact page. And lastly, we have 2 further webinars scheduled in July. Next week on 16th of July at 2 p.m. is What Next for our workforce. And on Thursday, the following week, we'll be launching TIA's Tourism Election Action Plan ahead of the general election. And you can register for both of these webinars on the TIA website now. It's closing, kia ora kia, kia tau, kia tātou katoa, te aiao, te aroha, me te maruto, tihe moriora. May peace, love and safety be upon us all. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thanks, Steve.